When Good People Disagree, Dealing with Conflict in Rotary. And it's going to take most of, if not all of our session tonight, with an opportunity to have some breakout rooms with some scenarios for you to discuss that I had sent to you on earlier in the week. Anyway, so please allow me to introduce our guest speaker. Now, Gail, do I pronounce your correctly? Weeb?
Yep.
Gail Weeb Uday is the Director of Coaching and Training for the Center for Conflict Resolution International, where she utilizes her expertise in interpersonal dynamics, team development, leadership development, and organizational systems in addressing conflict issues in the workplace. As a professional certified coach, Gail is frequently involved in coaching individuals and teams as they deal with conflict, change, and goal setting. She's also a self-taught artist. If you follow Gail on her Facebook page, you will see her beautiful her art, and she's recently begun teaching acrylic paint pouring workshops as she shares her love of the creative process. Gail herself is a Rotarian. She served as president of the Rotary Club of Orleans for 2 years, 2017 to 2019. She has served as a zone trainer for the district governor-elect partners and as an international training leader at the Rotary International Assembly. She currently serves as chair for the District Training and Learning Committee, the program chair for District Conference 2020 or 2020, and the conference chair for 2021. Gail is a Paul Harris Fellow, a major donor, and a member of the Rotary Foundation's Bequest Society. So please join me in welcoming Gail. Welcome, Gail. Over to you.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here. I did, what was it, last month or a month and a half ago? Anyway, a little while back, did a Tuesday talk talking a little bit about conflict and conflict management styles. And I know I can't see everybody on my screen, but I just like a sense, if you just raise your hand, I can't see it if you do it electronically, but just raise your hand if you were there and heard that. So I'm seeing a few hands. Okay. So some of you, I thought I recognized a few faces in the group, and that talk was specifically about conflict management styles. Tonight, I want to focus what we talk about a little bit more about various aspects of conflict and really focus it in on what that means for you as an incoming president. But I know some of you are AGs and other leadership in Rotary. This pertains to you as well, because when there is conflict in Rotary at whatever level, whether it's a district level, whether it's at the club level, whether it's at a committee level, it can end up impacting a great many of us around that conflict. And if you are saying to yourself, what? Rotary has conflict? It's never happened as far as I know. Then you haven't been a Rotarian long enough. You're too new a Rotarian, because I don't know of any Rotary group that hasn't managed to experience some conflict somewhere along the way. Now, doesn't mean it's conflict that becomes completely dysfunctional, but the reality is that conflict happens all the time. And for those of you who were in the Tuesday talk that I presented, I gave a definition of conflict, and I said conflict is a difference. And that's all it is. It's a difference of wants, needs, expectations. It's just a difference. And we all have differences because we're different people. So conflict happens. And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to share my presentation. And I'm gonna just start it from the beginning. Are you seeing my screen? Okay, great.
Yes, we're good.
Excellent. So as Beth said, when good people disagree, dealing with conflict in Rotary, I named it this for a very specific reason. And that is that quite often when we get to thinking about conflict, our temptation is to think about who's right and who's wrong in the situation. And the reality is, and especially I find in Rotary, it's not that conflict happens because people are trying to be nasty to each other, or one person's a bad person compared to the other. And it's not that. It's just, as I said, the fact that we're different. And we often get really passionate about those differences in Rotary for the very reason that we're good Rotarians, and we feel passionately about what we're doing, and so we want others to agree with us on how we're doing it. So what I want to talk about tonight is a little bit about how and why conflict happens, and these models or these ideas that I'm going to present to you are across the board, whether it's conflict in Rotary, whether it's conflict in your family, whether it's conflict with your neighbors, whether it's conflict at work, wherever your conflict might happen, these aspects of conflict are there. The reason that they're worth talking about is that when we understand a little bit about how and why conflict happens, it also gives us a lot of insights as to what we need to do to resolve it. And then I want to spend a little time talking exactly about that. What are some tips for intervening, especially in the Rotary world? How do we deal with conflict, these conflicts that arise there? And as Beth mentioned, and I believe you all received a list of case studies. We're going to divide up into breakout groups, give you a little chance to discuss those scenarios in light of some of these things that I'm going to present tonight, and see what insights you come up with out of that. We'll give a little time to debrief, and of course, questions at the end. If you've got questions along the way, by all means. I'm not going to necessarily monitor the chat, so I'd need like Charles or someone to jump in with a burning question if we need to answer it mid presentation. Is that okay, Charles?
Yes, that's fine. Yeah.
Great.
Maybe if Ron can do it. I'm not too sure if my computer's going to make it through the session.
Perfect. Great. Okay, great. I'll count on you, Ron. If there's some questions that come up in the chat, and just by all means interrupt and jump in, and I can answer them as we go, by all means. All right. So that's what we're about this evening. And so I want to talk first about where these conflicts come from and what they are. Beth mentioned that my work, a great deal of my work, is dealing with workplace conflict. And it's so interesting when we get calls from companies and organizations asking for our help in conflict situations. 9 times out of 10, they will tell us, well, we've got these 2 personalities that are having a problem, and I'll get words like personality clash, or like I said, 2 strong personalities, or it's a difficult workplace relationship. And personalities and different personalities do cause conflict. That is absolutely true, but it is not 90% of the time. And so the reason why it's valuable to look at where the conflict is coming from is because we deal with them very, very differently, or at least we should be. Because if we're misunderstanding, and if, for example, we say, oh, this is all about different personalities, and we deal with it accordingly, a lot of times we end up making the situation worse instead of better, if it's not actually a personality issue. So I want to take a look at each one of these and give you a little sense of what they are. So we'll start over on one end and look at systemic conflict. Systemic conflict is the kind of conflict that is a result of really large systemic issues that are actually outside and beyond the control of any one one organization or entity. So for example, within Rotary, if you look at a historical conflict about women joining Rotary, and there was a time, and in fact, there still is sometimes, I have had, just within last few years, I had a gentleman tell me that he still believed that women in Rotary was the cause of all Rotary problems. But there were a strong contingent of Rotarians who didn't believe that women should be a part of Rotary. That perspective, or that understanding about male and female roles and where they belong, came out of a much larger systemic issue. It wasn't just about Rotary. It was about, and still is with some places, people's opinions about what women should be doing and what men should be doing. That's a systemic issue. That's a big, huge issue. It's not unique to Rotary. It's not because of anything that Rotary does, but it does impact us within our organization. Other systemic issues are things like racism and diversity. And some people have difficulty with that. Well, racism is a huge systemic issue. It goes way beyond Rotary, but Rotary is impacted by racism as well, and it does cause conflict in certain places. So those are big systemic issues. And I'm going to come back in a minute to then what do you do about these, but I want to explain each of them first. The next one over is structural. And structural conflict is exactly what that implies. It is about the structure of the organization. So in Rotary, your club has bylaws. That is a structural thing. And we use those bylaws to determine next steps or rules to follow. Sometimes we choose to break the rules and we don't live by our bylaws, but they are there to set out a structure. Another aspect of structure in Rotary is just how we're set up in terms of clubs that are part of districts, that are part of zones, that are, all of that is all a part of the structure of Rotary. Well, that causes conflict at times. One structural conflict I can think of happened just recently when we got rezoned. And so it used to be that the zones 32 and 24 were paired zones, but then they switched some districts around, and so now we've got 32 and 28 instead, and we've got different clubs as a part of that. Well, that tussle to decide how they would restructure those zones, my understanding is it was quite some heated conversations happened at the levels that decided that, to determine how those zones should be restructured. Now, those are structural issues. That's all about the structure and the conflict that can result from that. Now, in the middle, they're relational, and that refers to how we relate to each other. So what I was saying before about people saying, personality clashes or personality differences cause all conflict, those are relational conflicts. So the fact that I'm a different kind of person than you can cause conflict. The fact that it can be anywhere from I'm very extroverted and very verbose, and you're more introverted and quiet, that can cause all kinds of problems because we're different kinds of people. Maybe I'm not a very much of a planner, and I kind of let things play out the way they play out and just kind of fly by the seat of my pants. And you're really a planner and you like things organized. Well, that can cause conflict when we're on a project together and we have different ways of operating. Those are relational issues because they're about who we are and how we operate. Then there are positional conflicts. And positional conflicts are those conflicts that are what some people would term a difference of opinion. Yeah, a lot of you are from the Toronto area. So, maybe you're Toronto Maple Leaf fans, and I'm from the Ottawa area, and I say, no, Ottawa Sens. I'm all about the Ottawa Sens. Well, the fact that we disagree on which team is the best team to root for is a positional conflict. It's I take this position, you take that position. In Rotary, in your club, it can be about, I think that our club needs to get behind this project, and most of our money that we raise needs to go towards this project. And you say, no, we've done enough of those kind of projects. We need to do a different kind of project. That's where most of our money needs to go. Well, that's a positional conflict. We just have different positions on that. And then finally, perceptual. And again, the best way to explain a perceptual conflict is a different interpretation of our intentions. So I may do or say something and I intend it one way. However, when I do or say that, you receive it in a way that was not my intention. I may make a joke and it just doesn't come across as funny to you. Maybe it's one of those things that hits too close to home for you, or, you just didn't like my tone when I said it. And you think, oh, is she trying to jab at me there? Not my intention, but it is the way it came across. That becomes a perceptual conflict. So if you think about those differences, and if you're thinking about any conflicts at all that you've experienced or that you're aware of, you can probably start seeing shades of those different types of conflict at play. And you hopefully can also understand that if we misunderstand what kind of conflict we're dealing with, we may deal with it inappropriately. So again, I know I'm shooting a lot of information out at you, but just to give you a sense. So perceptual conflicts, misunderstanding, miscommunication, the best way, or the only way really, to resolve a perceptual conflict is clarification. Now, that sounds easy. It's not necessarily easy, but clarification means that I did or said something, you interpreted it one way, and you say to me, Gail, were you jabbing at me? Were you trying to, because I received that as a really inappropriate comment. And I go, oh, no, that's not what I meant at all. What I meant was this. That is the only way to resolve a perceptual conflict. Now, some perceptual conflicts are huge, and they're not easy to resolve, but the only way to do it is through that clarification and checking back. This is my perception, this is my intention, this is my perception, this is my intention, and to keep going back and forth on that. Now, positional conflict, you've got a couple of choices with positional conflict, because it depends on how important or how significant those positions are. So I mentioned, for example, what hockey team to cheer for. We can just choose to agree to disagree on that in terms of what's more important, right? So we can just say, you know what, let's just not talk about hockey. It's why we often say that we don't talk about religion and politics in Rotary, for that very reason, because we can get into a lot of positional conflict there, and the reality is a lot of times we just have to agree to disagree on that. But we can also say, you know what, let's meet in the middle. So for example, you want to do this kind of project, I want to do that kind of project. We don't have quite time for both. You know what? Let's do this one this year. We're going to do the other one next year. let's give a little less to this one and a little less to that one, and we'll support them part ways. Let's do, let's do a third project and not do either one of them. So we have some negotiation room on that. So it can be, you, then me, let's do a little bit of both. Let's do neither and do something completely different, or let's just agree to disagree. So it depends with the positional a little bit on what the positions are all about. When it comes to relational conflict, the only way to resolve a relational conflict is to decide how you want to define your relationship. So, for example, I'm the person who likes to fly by the seat of my pants and kind of, I tend to do things last minute. I'm not a real planner, and you're a real planner, and we're on a committee together, and we need to work together. And my style's really irritating you. At a certain point, in order to resolve that situation, we're going to have to sit down and say, okay, let's talk about how we want this committee to work, what's going to work for both of us, and how we're going to make that happen. And so instead of me going away and going, she's driving me nuts, and somebody else going, she's driving me nuts, let's talk together, let's discuss it, let's figure out how we want to work together, let's define our relationship. With structural conflict, the only way to resolve structural conflict is to change the structure. So I mentioned before women in Rotary. I'm going to skip over that. I'm going to come back to that because I mentioned that in systemic. In structural, talked about like your bylaws. So let's say you had in your club, your bylaws said that you miss so and so many meetings and you're out. And that causes a lot of conflict because people's lives are busy and they're missing meetings and they're getting to that point frequently. And it's, and some people are saying, well, they need to be out because those are the bylaws, those are the rules, and they didn't come to enough meetings. If you want to resolve that, you're going to have to change your bylaws about attendance. Now, the interesting thing about structural conflict is that you change the structure, and a lot of times you trade one conflict for another one. So yes, you change the structure, but the new structure can also cause conflict. And in fact, when Rotary International started talking about changing attendance rules and and saying there's no Rotary police out there saying you have to come to so many meetings anymore, then their biggest concern was that people just wouldn't show up. If there weren't rules around how many meetings you had to go to, would people suddenly stop coming, and would they not be committed anymore, and would clubs just fall apart? So you trade one for the other sometimes. And so a lot of times we have to pick the structure that simply causes the least amount of conflict, not necessarily makes us conflict free. And then systemic. Systemic conflicts usually cannot be resolved inside an organization. So, racism is not going to be resolved by your club. We can do things to minimize its impact, but in and of itself, we will not resolve those big systemic issues. As I was mentioning, women in Rotary, systemic conflict at one time. And what did Rotary do? They ended up changing the structure, right? They changed the rules, and they addressed it in a structural way. And as I said, there are still some people who don't believe that women should be in Rotary. And there are some parts of the world where clubs are basically men and women do not join those clubs. So systemically, not all those issues have been resolved. Structurally, they've been dealt with. But as you can see, that issue is why the systemic issues, those conflicts don't necessarily go away. A lot of times we figure out, how do we live with them? And again, how do we minimize their impact. So step number one, if you are experiencing or are aware of conflict happening, ask yourself, where is it sitting? What kind of conflict is it? And you might find that it's more than one. You might say, well, it's perceptual, there's misunderstanding, but it's relational too. Happens frequently. Or it might be structural, but it's also become relational. That can happen as well. So it's not always just one, but it isn't necessarily all of them either. And again, if you try to address one when it's not that kind of conflict, let's say it's a structural conflict and you're trying to deal with it like a perceptual, and if I just explain myself better, people will agree with me. Well, no, if the problem is the structure, it doesn't matter how much explaining you do, that's not going to resolve it. So it gives you a little sense of that. I also want to talk about the fact that conflict escalates. So I don't know how many of you enjoy getting involved in conflict. Most of us don't particularly enjoy it. But the interesting thing about conflict is that whether you jump into it and say, I'm going to get involved and I kind of like to stir the pot, whether you're the kind of person who wants to stay out of conflict no matter what, it doesn't really matter. There is a pattern to how conflicts escalate. Some will escalate slowly, some will escalate quickly, but they will all escalate in this pattern. At their first level, at that lowest level, conflicts are productive. Remember I said conflict is just a difference? If at that first level, we deal with the difference, we discuss it, we figure out, what's going on here, why did this conflict arise, you want to resolve it, I want to resolve it, we'll resolve it. And it'll be productive and we'll have a better solution afterwards. We'll understand each other better because of it. It's productive. Good things can come out of it. Unfortunately, far more often, what happens is we don't take advantage of that productive moment when conflict first arises. And instead, we allow it to get personalized very quickly. And what that looks like is this. So, Charles, you're next on my screen, so I'm just going to use you as an example. So Charles and I have a disagreement about something. And instead of, like I said, instead of having that conversation right at the beginning and resolving it and hitting the iron while it's hot, I get annoyed. And I go, oh, that Charles, you know what? He's just way too stubborn. And I can't believe that he's acting like that. And this wouldn't be a problem if Charles wasn't like that. And Charles very quickly, somebody asks him, so what's going on there with Gail? And Charles goes, well, what the problem is? The problem's Gail, right? So we've personalized it. We're not even talking about what the issue is anymore. Now we're talking about the other person and why they're the problem. And so as soon as we do that, as soon as we're talking about that other person, instead of talking about the actual conflict, we've personalized the situation. Now, that can stay there for a while, but the fact of the matter is that I don't spend a lot of time just talking to myself about the problem that Charles is. I start going to other members of the club. I start telling other people in the district, don't you agree with me? Isn't Charles a problem? And Charles is probably doing the same thing, going, yeah, boy, that Gail, like, I can't believe this. And very quickly, what happens are two things. One, I call issue proliferation. So now it's not just about the original thing that caused the conflict. Now it's about all the other issues I have with Charles, because I'll talk about, yeah, well, I remember when he first joined this club, I knew he was going to be a problem then because he did this. And you know what? If he becomes chair of that committee, just watch, it's going to fall apart. So I'll go back in time, I'll go forward in time, but I'm going to add issue upon issue about why Charles is the problem. And same back at me. He'll do the same thing in reverse. The other piece of it is that if I'm talking like this to other people, I'm getting them involved. And once I'm getting them involved, then we call that triangling. People start taking sides. Now, here's the interesting thing. You may say, no, I'm Switzerland, I'm neutral. I may come to you and say, yeah, you agree with me, right? Charles is the real problem. And you go, you know what? I want nothing to do with this. I have no personal beef with Charles. I don't have an issue. I don't want anything to do with this. Guess what happens? I decide whose side you're on. And I may decide, oh, well, I know you're just being nice. You're being a nice Rotarian, but you really agree with me. Couldn't say it out loud, but you really agree with me. Or I may decide, yeah, I know. You don't want to say, but that means you're on Charles's side. So I'll assign you a side, whether you agree or not, whether you want a part in it of it or not. And same with Charles and his conversations. And so I start building my people. He starts building his people, and we've moved into hostile stages. And again, I can't state this enough. If you're the bystander, you may not even realize that you've been assigned a side, but you have been. And I'll just use the example. This is a workplace, not a Rotary example, but I'll never forget a situation I dealt with. And somebody new started with this team that was experiencing a great deal of conflict. And he told me later, he said, the first question I got asked is, whose side are you on? And he said, I'm not on anybody's side. Like, I'm brand new here. I don't know anybody. I'm not on anybody's side. And they said, well, when are you having coffee break? Because if you're having coffee break at 10, you're on that side. And if you're having coffee break at 10:30, you're on this side. So they assign sides no matter what. And once we get to that hostile stage, and there's that sense of here's this side and here's this side of the conflict, there's this nasty back and forth that can happen. And not all conflicts result in violence. I have not seen any Rotary conflicts that have resulted in violence, but if violence is to be a part of the conflict, this is where it happens, at that hostile stage, because it can often mean a tit for tat. So what I have seen in Rotary is, well, my arch nemesis over there, who I don't like, they suddenly have volunteered to be on that fundraiser committee, planning committee. Oh, okay. So they think they're going to get brownie points for that. Guess who else is going to sign up? I'm going to be right there, because they're not going to get any brownie points. I'm not going to get. Or, I see that the district governor is coming for a visit, and they're going to talk to the district governor. Are they talking about me? Are they telling them that I'm going to make sure I go and have my conversation with the district governor as well? And so there'll be this sort of this competitiveness that happens at that stage. And finally, when it becomes completely polarized, it is when those two sides that have developed refuse to interact, to have anything to do with each other, to cooperate in any way. This is when people say, I'm leaving, and they leave the club, can't operate there anymore. This is when somebody leaves and says, and I'm taking all my friends with me. And maybe they join a new Rotary club, maybe they don't join Rotary anymore after that, but it's completely polarized. As I said before, some conflicts do this quickly, some do it slowly, but they all will escalate over time. When you are involved in the conflict yourself, you can resolve it at the productive stage. You even can resolve conflicts at the personalized stage if you start to realize, oh, you know what, this has gone too far. We need to sit down and resolve it. Individuals, if they're willing to do it, can do it. By the time you've reached hostile stage, however, because you've involved so many other people, it's virtually impossible to resolve it yourself. You will need some kind of assistance to do that. Now, that doesn't have to be like professional assistance. I'm not saying that necessarily, but you'll need probably some kind of third party to help facilitate that process of resolving. And we can talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. And you can even resolve it at the polarized stage. People can come back to Rotary after quitting and all of that, or they can be convinced not to quit. But again, likely to need help at that point, less likely to be able to do it yourself. And again, all of that comes with a desire to resolve it as well. Now, one other piece that I wanted to mention, and many of you were exposed to this when I talked at the Tuesday talk about the different styles. So I'm not going to go into this in any detail, but we also all come at conflict sort of naturally in different ways. And I mentioned, those people who kind of enjoy stirring the pot, that's the woodpecker style. They kind of like to see, to get people a little riled up to see where things will go. The owl is the one who's going to make sure that everything is discussed at length. The hummingbird wants the quick fix. Let's just meet in the middle and move on. The ostrich is the ultimate avoider of all things conflict. And the parakeet is the one who just wants everybody to get along. Let's just get along and move on. And we all have that natural style that can work well in certain situations and can get us in trouble in other situations. And they also all interact with each other. That causes some conflicts to be more difficult to be to resolve than others. And so I can go into more depth on that later if you want, but that's all I'm going to say about that right now. One last thing that I want to draw your attention to when talking about conflict and trying to understand where you can find an opportunity for resolution. And that is that anytime a conflict comes up, what you're going to know about and hear about first are people's positions. In other words, as the diagram says, what we say we want. But there's always something underneath that position. That position's just that tip of the iceberg. What's underneath that are our interests, what's important to us, what we really want. And even deeper than that is what we absolutely need. And so I gave you one example here that's Rotary pertinent. So the position, somebody says, I'm leaving this club. They're in a huff, they're angry, I'm leaving. That statement is a position because there's all kinds of reasons why the person might say they're leaving. And so the question is, what are their interests? What do they really want? When they say they're leaving, what do they really want? And again, here's just one example. It's not always the person's interest. There may be all kinds of interests, but the person may really want someone to tell them they're an important part of the club. You can't leave because we really need you here. That's what they want to hear. And so they threaten to leave because they want to hear that they're important. And underneath that, what do they need? Well, it's a need we all have, and that is to be a part of a community that accepts and values us for who we are. That's a critical human need. And so if that's the need, that we want to be part of a community that we share values with and that values us, and out of that our interest is to be told that we're important to it, does it sometimes come out as an ultimatum? If you don't give me this, I'm out of here. Yeah, it can. And oftentimes we react to that position statement, as opposed to looking at what are the interests and what are the needs. And the only one that can tell you what their interests and what their needs are is the person who's told you what their position is. So the question is, you need to ask questions. But how do you do that? I always tell people that the interests and the needs are the why underneath the position. So again, using this example, I'm leaving this club. If you want to know what their interests and needs are, you want to know why. Why are they leaving the club? The only problem is that when you ask why directly, a lot of times you actually, it sounds confrontational. So somebody says, I'm leaving this club. They're angry and you go, why? Why are you leaving? And they go, I'm leaving, and they don't express their interest. So a lot of times you have to ask questions in a different way than why. And I remember what I said about conflict being a difference in wants, needs, and expectations. A lot of times those are your cues for finding out or asking the why without just directly asking why. So for example, someone says, I'm leaving. Instead of saying why, one of the questions might be, well, so what would need to happen for you to feel comfortable staying in this club? Now, that's a lot more difficult to answer with, well, I'm just leaving. More likely, they're going to start saying, now they might not immediately say, I want someone to tell me I'm important, but it's going to start a different kind of dialogue. Maybe they say, I'm leaving this club, and you might ask, well, what were you expecting to happen in this situation that made you so upset? What would you have liked to have seen done differently? And all of those kinds of questions, those curious, what were you expecting? What did you want to have happen? What are you worried about? What would be the consequences? So what would be the consequences of you leaving? What would be the consequences of you staying? They start answering those kind of questions, you're going to start hearing about their interests and their needs. So there are ways to ask why without directly asking why. And the biggest key is being curious and to keep kind of delving into how they see things, try and understand it from their vantage point, and have a look at that way. Now, one last little bit I'm going to talk about before we break you into those breakout groups is a couple of things. So when conflict arises, first and foremost, curb your assumptions. Put your assumptions aside. It is really easy if you've got that club member who always seems to bring drama with him or her, it's easy to assume that they are in the wrong or they caused the problem or whatever. It is really important to put all your assumptions aside and look at each and every case as a fresh, don't know what happened here, let's find out, and be incredibly curious. I train a lot of people to become conflict resolution practitioners, and I will tell all of them, your curiosity is the best skill you have when it comes to dealing with conflict, because if you just keep asking questions instead of making statements, you'll get a lot further in resolving conflict than by making statements about what people should or shouldn't do. And when you ask those questions, listen to understand. Find out, what are those real interests? What are the real needs being expressed here? What's really going on? You can, a lot of people are scared to understand because they think that means that they agree. You can understand and disagree, but it's really important that you understand. The other thing I think is especially important for us as Rotarians to know is that bringing it out in the open doesn't make it worse. We have this tendency in Rotary to not want to acknowledge the conflicts that occur because then we're the bad club. or we're the dysfunctional club, or we're the dysfunctional committee, whatever the case may be. However, the more you try to tamp it down, the more opportunity you have for that escalation to happen that I was talking about, and for it to just get worse without resolution. The other thing that you need to be aware of is that Rotary recognizes that conflict happens, and we do have protocols for dealing with conflict. The case studies that we're going to look at in a minute are all based on, they're not exactly them, but they are all based on Rotary conflicts that I'm well aware of, many of them because I was asked to go and intervene with that particular club and deal with that issue. So there are protocols, there are people out there that can help with these situations, and it makes Rotary stronger when we do so. So it is not wrong to bring it out in the open. And this is what I would especially say as an incoming president, as an area governor, as a district leadership. You're not required to decide who's right and who's wrong. That's not your job. Your job is to allow the people involved in the conflict to figure out for themselves how they're going to move forward. Bring it forward, bring it out in the open, have the conversation, but you do not need to be judge and jury and decide, yes, you're right, you should do this. No, you're wrong, you should do that. In fact, I have seen a couple of cases where some presidents, some area governors have decided that that is their role and have only, unfortunately, made matters worse instead of better. So not being able to see all your faces as I'm making this presentation, I hope that this has all made sense to you. What I'd like to do now is to get you into breakout groups. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here for a second. And we're going to put you in breakout groups. And we have 5 different case studies. So do we have enough there? Who's doing the breakout groups? I'm not sure if we lost Charles or not.
Yeah.
Is Ron doing it?
I'm still here.
Okay.
We will be doing, so it'll be 10 different breakout rooms. So each case will be covered by 2. So
Okay.
group 1 and 6 will do case study 1. 2 and 7 will do case study 2. 3 and 8 will do case study 3. 4 and 9 will do case study 4. And 5 and 10 will do case study 5. It's going to take me a few minutes to get everybody in their rooms, but they're going to be 5 or 6 people to a room.
Great. And so you should all have those case studies. There's some questions there that were put on there. You'll have about 15 minutes to discuss, then we'll bring you back and we'll do a little debrief about what you discovered in those breakouts. Have fun.
Unmute. Hey, everybody. Wait. I think, Charles, I was trying to kick that thing off and he kicked me out of my room.
Uh-oh.
That's
Sorry
all
about that.
It's over. So we're all good.
All right. Well, people are coming back now. Slowly.
Okay, do we have everybody back?
Everyone is back.
Excellent, thank you. I was sitting in one group and it had an excellent conversation. I hope that you did in your various groups. I want to do a little bit of a debrief. I'm watching our time though, so I want to make sure that we don't go too far. So I can't have each group tell us everything that happened in your 15-minute conversation, because then we'll be here for several more hours. So rather, let's look at it case study by case study. And we had two breakouts talk about it. If I could have somebody from each one, just tell us one thing that came out of your conversation that you thought was of interest. So case study number one, we had group 1 and group 6 talking about it. And this is a scenario where we've got a current club president who's very well versed in the bylaws and the rules, very focused on that. It's turned off some of the newer members, and they've come to you as the president-elect and said, you know, if you're going to be that way too, we're out of here because we don't like it. So group number 1, first of all, and I don't know who wants to speak on your behalf, but okay,
I'm actually president and president-elect, so I figured definitely the new president is a friend of mine. So basically, you know, communication. At the end of the day, it's communication. Find out what it is that is turning them off, what we can do to resolve the issue, if it can be resolved. I mean, if it's the rules and regulations, can we, you know, make them a little bit more lax? Or, you know, it's either, are we going to lose the new members or are we going to lose the old members? Mm-hmm. So we need to communicate and see what we can work out.
Okay, great. And from group number 6, who wants to jump in with something that came out of the conversation there?
I will, Gail. It's Heather from Ajax.
Great.
So 2 big ideas that came in was, one is to have a club meeting where you're reviewing the bylaws, so you're educating the new members and getting the buy-in, see if there's any changes they need to be updated. And second idea was getting the new members maybe in their own committee or active in the club in some way, so they're feeling that they're not just following rules, they are doing their own projects or that. I don't know if there's anybody else from our group, but we did indicate also that it was communicational, it could be a bigger issue than just the bylaws. It could be some more management style.
Great. And I just got a message that one of the groups did the wrong one. So there should be a third group that also did this one. Am I right? Is there a third group that talked about this? Who wants to, it's all good.
That would be our group.
Okay.
I think from what I took from the conversation is, again, it's about communication. And listen first, speak second. Beth just mentioned this. We've got 2 ears, 2 eyes, but only 1 mouth. So let's listen first, speak second, and pay attention to what the new members are saying. You know, and go to, you know, head it straight on, like let's figure it out and go from there. We don't want to lose members, but we also don't want to tick them off.
Right, right. Exactly. And when you've got, when you've got a group of people, so here you've got some newer members, and they're basically saying, we don't like all this focus on the bylaws. Remember, that's their positional statement, right? What's underneath that could be a whole variety of things. So it can be anywhere from, we don't like rules, to, we just don't get it. Like we don't understand these rules, or we didn't sign up knowing that these were the rules, or it could just be, but we've got so many other things we want to talk about, we don't have enough time for them because we're always talking about the rules. So there can be a whole lot of different things and different interests and different needs underneath that position. And until, as you've all mentioned, until there's communication, until you're asking those questions and finding out what's really going on, why are they not happy with all the focus on the bylaws, can be a whole variety of different reasons and different interests underneath there, which will then change what might be the solution to the problem. But it requires conversation, because as many of you said also, this isn't as simple as a structural conflict. It isn't just about the bylaws. It likely is perceptual, how it's being interpreted, and relational. And just how different people focus on different things, and some like rules and that's just their comfort zone, and others don't. All right, sounds great. Case study number 2.
That would be Gordon Wallace's group or Kimberly Halsman's group.
Okay, and so this one is, you've heard some rumblings about Phil's commitment to the club because he's been absent a lot of times. Club board has met, and there's been a motion to terminate his membership. Now you've got other club members who are concerned they're also going to be terminated if they aren't in attendance enough. So who wants to speak on behalf of your conversations?
So this is Andrea. I'll give it a go. So we felt that this was structural, but also relational. And interestingly, the dynamic of this conflict actually related back to some of the real lived experiences of the clubs who were represented in this room, where there actually seems to be a double standard around whether there's a bylaw in place or not around attendance, that sometimes, someone hasn't attended for years and they get to stay in the club, yet another person may be terminated upon that, one over the line of not attending. And so that's where the relational piece came in, and that fear around, am I going to lose my place in this club? There was also discussion around the fact that one of the board members who's been approached wasn't even at that meeting, and so that decision was made without the full board. And in terms of supports or next steps would be reviewing the bylaws and really understanding, where are we at? What is our current context? Is this how we want to operate or need to operate right now? And really doing a thorough review on that.
Great. And the other group, who's speaking on their behalf?
They may have already spoken if Amy was.
Oh, was that the group that did
the wrong one?
Oh, okay, great.
I think so.
All right. Okay, no problem. So yeah, exactly as you said, Andrea, that there likely is a structural aspect to this, because there are rules involved, right? In what may be the bylaws, and so there's part of that is the structure, but especially if that structure is not meted out consistently, chances are there's more to it than just the structure. And I have seen that as well, where it's actually the structure is suddenly used as an excuse for something that's actually a relational issue. We don't like Phil, we want him out, and guess what? Now we have an excuse because he didn't attend so many meetings. But the next guy who says, yeah, but I haven't attended very many either, and I might be out, and go, you're okay because we like you. You'll stay in, right? So then that's not a structural issue, then that's a relational issue. And so depending on what it is and where it lands, one is, do we change the bylaws? Are those the bylaws we want to have, as you said? Or if it's a relational issue, is that how we want this club to operate? Like, do we want to make sure that if we don't see eye to eye with them, we find a way to get them out? And so we need to have some conversations around that. All right, group number 3, or case study number 3 rather. You're the incoming president, and you've got a current club president and president nominee, so on either side of you, who don't get along, and both of them have come to you basically with complaints about the other one, and figuring that you're going to be on their side. Which groups spoke about that, and who wants to tell us what you came up with?
The group that had Brenda Hellier and Peter Hernandez, 2 different groups.
Yep. Yeah, so when we started to look at the entire case, we determined that with regards to conflict type, it was an interesting mesh between relational, positional, and perceptual. It had aspects of all 3, which made it interesting. And at the same time, it then led us to think, okay, you've got these 2 relationships, and they're both saying these things that are obviously on opposite ends of the spectrum. So as a step, we indicated that we would talk to each one of them individually. And because it was clear that through the position of one of them was, oh, the other one's going to destroy the club. So then that's the position, and find out what the interests are behind that by talking to them, and go deeper in their individual needs. But at the end of it, we said we just had to remain curious, not take a side, find their common needs, and then mesh their common needs together, and try to bring them to a position of workability.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, excellent. And there was another group that had a look at this one.
I believe it was the group that Brenda Hellier was part of.
Oh, I think you're on mute, Brenda.
Okay, so our conversation almost went the same way. We felt it was relationship with some of perceptual in there as well. We felt that the important thing was to get them both to find a commonality between them that they could work on. And some of the ways that we were going to do that too was a two-way process. One was to get an elder of the club or someone they both respected to talk to, so that they could just get a conversation going with this person. And also, instead of just meeting one-on-one with these people, because then they're, and I'm going to use the word polarized, although you've used it in a different way, but they're at opposite ends. If they are allowed each to bring a friend, it sort of tempers or mellows the conversation and allows them to listen a little bit easier to friends.
Yeah, you brought up the term polarized. This is one of those issues that I could see becoming very polarizing if it's not addressed, right? Because if you've got 2 people that are really not getting along, it's very easy for people to start picking sides and say, you know, I prefer this president, I prefer this upcoming president. Like it's easy to see how this one could escalate quite quickly. And I think you're both exactly right. This is one of those ones where it's going to be really important to unearth what the interests, what the needs are underneath these comments. I would add, and you both mentioned about finding interests in common. Sometimes it's hard to find interests in common. There are times where you have people who disagree and they don't actually have too many interests in common. And it makes it really difficult. You can still resolve it, however, because if you meet both of their interests, even if they're different, but you can find a solution that meets both of those interests. You can actually find resolution. So the best, of course, is to find mutual interests. But even if you can't, it is possible to find solutions that work for everybody and address their particular needs. So that's great. Let's look at number 4. So at yesterday's Zoom club meeting, the chair of the community services basically made a commitment to a local community group on behalf of the club without too many other people in the club or on the community services committee even knowing about it. And now people are worried. Which groups had that?
Dan from Sterling.
Okay, go ahead.
We went through all your questions. We talked quite a bit about actually what conflict zone was going to be. We settled mostly on it mostly being structural because the chairman acted on their own and they didn't even discuss it with the committee. We felt she was a bit of a woodpecker and maybe to bring that out in the open. We felt that it got to the personalized level because there was those private conversations going on in the background. We felt a lot of questions to be asked. Find out why they went ahead and signed this contract without discussing it with anybody. What we needed more details of the contract. Is it binding? Are we, is this a binding contract? What is our monetary commitment? What is how many volunteers are going to be needed and what's involved? So we need to know more. We're not saying maybe it wasn't a bad decision, but we don't know enough about it. And he or she, I'm not even sure, they didn't handle it properly. So, so we kind of felt to proceed that we needed to get more details. And also the president would need to talk to the chair and make sure they knew what the protocol, like what the procedure should be, that the committee needs to be involved, and depending on perhaps the size of it, that it needs to come back to the club as a whole and get full approval and everything. So we just felt that, and maybe that's a good time to inform all the club, right? Of everybody on the club about what the proper procedures should be when you're a chairman and acting, because that's come out in previous, discussions here that's something that, a lot of people, we need to know the proper procedures in meetings and in these things. So maybe that's just something that we should do in general. So yeah, so we had a great discussion. It was really good.
Excellent. And there another group that discussed this one?
Yeah, I can talk to that one.
Sure.
We kind of agreed that it was structural and relational, but maybe even a wee bit of perceptual. We felt that the president should sit down with the chair and try to get a better understanding of why they made the decision this way. We even felt it might have been typical of a Rotarian who was very excited and had found a new project and went straight ahead with it without discussion. And also they needed to make sure that this person understands and knows the bylaws, because they may not have, due to a lack of education by the club itself. The interesting thing, Sean Bailey, he actually immediately told us he has been and is still dealing with a situation similar. So that was quite interesting. But anyway, that is what our discussion was.
Thank you for that. And I love that you both saw that likely there's a structural aspect to this, that the person maybe for whatever reason didn't understand, what the parameters were of their role and how these things should necessarily go. And you could also get a sense of how in a situation like this, it's very easy to put a label on that person and go, oh, look at this person is just a troublemaker. And that's not necessarily going to be the way that you're going to resolve this. If you deal with it as a structural issue, trying to understand why they made the decision that they did, and then address the structure around it, making sure people understand how you go about this, et cetera, it may well resolve it. We have just a couple of minutes to look at case study number 5. So this email's gone out And this person's quite upset. They didn't feel like they got enough support from the rest of the club members. And now they're saying, you know, I think I'm out of here if I don't get the support that I need. Which groups talked about this one?
Well, I can speak to it if you like, Roger, Tessier and Coburg. We looked at it, we really seriously thought it was hostile. It was her way or the highway. Definitely a woodpecker, no question about it. We decided the best way to deal with this person was to meet with her face to face, so that there was no question, you know, at least with body language and so on, we can determine really the truth that's coming out. After discussing with her, we determined that she was her own worst enemy. We would tell her that she doesn't delegate enough. She simply tries to do it all herself. And she definitely needs the compliments and appreciation for what she does, because she does do a lot. She doesn't allow other people to do it for her. So our solution, it would be we would suggest to her that we would find her a co-chair, take some of the responsibilities away from her. And this way, she could be the overseer of the whole thing to make sure it's a success, because we know how good a job she can do. So we would build on her ego, and we would take some of the responsibilities away from her. Make sure that she would make sure then that it would be a success. Succession would be there, because we also felt deep down, maybe she felt she's stuck with this forever because nobody else can do it like she can. So we would probably resolve a lot of her problems by meeting face to face.
Okay, thank you, Roger. And there was another group that discussed this one?
No, we were the ones that did the wrong one, so.
Okay, no problem. So yeah, this, you know, and I love that, you know, it's hostile. She's already threatening she's gonna quit, right? This is one of those scenarios. There are some, I think I said, when it escalates, some of it can escalate very slowly, some of it can move very quickly. So you can go from a productive conflict to a hostile conflict in minutes sometimes. And this may be an example of that, moving quite significantly up that ladder of escalation very quickly. And sometimes those are actually the easiest ones to resolve because they blow hot and cold so fast. But again, another situation where you really have to find out what is behind this statement and her frustration, right? As Roger mentioned, is it because she feels like she's going to be stuck with this forever and there's nobody else who can do what she does? Is it that she needs to hear some of the warm fuzzies about how great she is and how important she is to the club? What is going on? What's behind the statements that she's making? Understanding, again, her needs and her wants are going to be so critical to having that conversation. I hope that you all got something out of those conversations in the breakout sessions. It sounds to me like they were really fruitful, and what I hope that you got out of it, a couple of things. Again, just to go back to what I said before, that none of us are alone in experiencing conflict. And in fact, I always kind of smile when people say, yeah, I've been dealing with something just like this, or, you know, I know a club that's dealing with something just like this. It is that reminder that these things happen all over the place. And it's okay to recognize that there is conflict in our club sometimes, because guess what? We're real people and we're passionate about what we do, and these things happen. The other thing that I want to say is, and I think everybody mentioned it in their debrief, that in one way, shape, or form, you're going to have a conversation about this. That there has to be a conversation. We call those difficult conversations, and we call them difficult for a reason. They're hard to have those conversations. They're not fun conversations by and large, but they are so very important to have, and they need to be done thoughtfully and carefully. You don't need to jump into a conversation like that. You can think about what you want to say, how you want to say it, how you want to approach it, what questions you need to ask, all those sorts of things. Make sure you have the right opportunity. You know, don't start asking people in-depth questions like that as they're running to the next meeting outside of, you know, at the end of one. But make sure that you have time to actually have the conversation. and recognize that it's tough. It'll be tough for you to bring it up. It'll be tough for the other person or people to have that conversation. If it's a conversation the whole club needs to have, it's going to be awkward. But if we persevere, if we make that first step, if we start making those difficult conversations a little bit more normative, they do become easier over time. And if that is something that that you get used to, that other people get used to, that your club gets used to, can you imagine the connection and that ability to understand each other and work together that a club has once it's had some of these difficult conversations about what kind of club do we want to be? How do we want to address these issues? How do we want to work together going forward? It will strengthen your club in the long term. Like I said, difficult, not easy to do. Think about it before you do it. Do not say, oh yeah, I'll jump into this with no worries. Take it carefully and slowly. But if you, I hope that what you've received here this evening gives you some structure and some framework for thinking about that and deciding how to move forward with those conversations and address those issues if and when they might arise for you. So with that, I'm going to say thank you so much for your time and attention this evening. It has been my pleasure to be here with you. And I just wish you all the best in the Rotary year ahead.
So Gail, I want to thank you on behalf of the group, but I want to have our district governor-elect Ron Dick more formally thank you.
Happy to, Beth. Gail, thank you for your message tonight. Now, I know none of the 55 Rotary clubs in our district has any conflict, but just in case they run into it, you've given them the tools that they need to be able to think first, to listen, and communicate, and take all the tools and messages that you've given everybody today. So thank you. Very much appreciate you sharing them with us tonight. Very much appreciate you coming to us a second time. And you can tell because people were bringing up the woodpecker. They remembered the last time.
That's great.
So on behalf of the 55 Rotary clubs and the 10 Rotaract clubs, our presidents have made a donation of $200 to the Rotary Foundation in your name as a thank you for your being here with us tonight. So thank you again. Welcome you back anytime.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And my pleasure being with you. Again, wishing you all the best.
Now, I think, Ron, after thanking Gail, you had another message you wanted to parlay into the session.
Yes, thank you, Beth. A couple of things. Some of you already know because we've gotten some of them out, but we do have a swag bag for your club theme pins and a couple of other gifts for you as presidents and assistant governors. When I get back tomorrow, I'll be coordinating with Iosif and the assistant governors to try and get them out to the rest of you as soon as we can. The other thing that I wanted to ask everybody is, are you interested in a trip to Chicago? Okay, so District Governor Mark and I have talked to RI, and we've asked them for the possibility of one of three dates: Monday, November the 8th, Monday, November the 15th, or Monday, November 22nd. They have to get back to us to let us know. They are open to the idea of tentatively booking it. They do feel optimistic that we would be able to visit as a combined group in November. So we wanted to work on doing it as a combined group so that the presidents from this year could use the credits that they've already got booked from last year with Air Canada and the hotel. But if you could keep those three dates marked, we would look at traveling on the Saturday. So 2 nights we'd be in Chicago. We'd look at arranging for a Chicago day on the Sunday And then we'd be in Rotary International on the Monday, 8 o'clock in the morning, despite your hangovers. And we'd be there until 3 o'clock. And then we'd hightail it out to the airport to get back to Canada. So if you could keep that in mind, Mark and I are working at putting together your Rotary International trip as a president or as a president-elect. Beth, back to you.
Okay, so thanks. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Gail. And thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. We'll look forward to seeing you next Wednesday and our session 7, if you can believe it, is session 7 next week. It's going to be focusing on youth services. So I look forward to seeing you then. Have a lovely rest of the evening, great week. Enjoy some beautiful sunshine and warm weather. And we'll see you next Wednesday. Take care, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys. Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Gail.